Well, I think overall, today's big topic is that no news is good news. We don't really have that much new to discuss today, at least on my end. I don't know if Josh or even John has anything they want to contribute to the proceedings, but at this point, I'll start by just reiterating some of what we heard from Wednesday's call. The number of overall deferments that have been requested has doubled in our portfolio from about 14 to 28 in just the last couple of last week now.
Hold on, we can repeat that. There's a gap in that.
Yeah, so we've had a doubling in the number of deferments that have been requested. We started with 14, and then last week on Friday, I sent out a note to all of our tenants explaining that we would prefer for them to hang on one second. Prefer for them to approach us to discuss any deferments or payment issues that they might have, so that we can deal with them in a proactive way, as opposed to having to chase them for non-payment later. And so we went from 14 to about 28 requests for residential deferments. We had a couple of new ones come in, and I had a client who very kindly called and offered to forgive rent for April for a number of her commercial tenants. And interestingly, that brings up a point that I'll make, which is right now, it's helpful to have that in my back pocket as the landlord to have that conversation. I'm not really inclined yet to recommend to my clients that we start talking about forgiveness of rent until we understand how far we're talking about all of this going, because you can forgive it and then end up in a compromised position from a negotiating standpoint several months down the road if you're trying to negotiate over another 2 months worth of rent. So in that I'm explaining this to you in a call that'll be videotaped and put on our website, I'm encouraging my clients to consider being very generous to their tenants once we understand the breadth of everything that we're going through, and we understand how deep and far this is going to go, and then we can start to become generous. We know how much generosity we're talking about.
But
so,
question, JJ, yes. Does that cause them some concern if there's going to be some reciprocation on funding or?
Exactly. We also don't know how far or what kind of support is available from any other sources. And I think that the position that we're taking now, which is let's not worry about it for now. Let's not get worked up about how much is being deferred. We'll discuss it. And I've made sure in my communications with my tenants to explain to them that we'll talk about the possibility of forgiveness as in addition to repayment, and the terms, how long it's going to take for us to get the repayment made, so that we can be generous in a variety of different ways. We can be generous in terms of how long it takes to get paid back. We can be generous in terms of and a few tenants, residential tenants in particular, have asked us, is there any interest? No, there's no interest to be charged on this. And I want to give lots of options and work with my clients in their specific situations to meet their needs. And to the extent that we're able to be very generous to our tenants, I will certainly encourage my clients to do that once we understand the extent of the package that we have to negotiate over when this is over. But we don't intend to necessarily proceed with evictions immediately. We don't need to file lawsuits if we feel like people are negotiating in good faith and can be trusted and have kept us informed as to their specific circumstances. So that's the situation that we're in right now. I'd like to introduce Denise to explain to us a little bit more about what we've heard, but as I started with at the top of the call, it sounds like no news is good news, and I'll welcome your explanation for that as well. Thank you.
Sure. I unfortunately was a little bit late, JJ, but I know that Dean Preston's proposed legislation has been deferred. It's gone to committee. which means that for 30 days it will be reviewed before it's presented again. Taking into consideration the mayor's order, or update, I should say, to the extension of the inability to terminate tenancy till May 22 now, we think that that's, believe it or not, a win, the fact that it's going to committee. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with the governor's order, if he opens up California sooner than maybe the May 22nd, which I don't think so, but you never know. There's so many moving parts that currently we're just focused on May 22 to be able to actually proceed on May 23rd in the normal sense of landlord-tenant law. So we're
Okay.
still, and it's an extension. Basically, we're exactly where we were a month ago, but now we're another month out. So April 22, it was supposed to be lifted. Now we're at May 22 with respect to residential. With respect to commercial, I believe it's May 19.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And, once again, we are trying to encourage everybody to take care of their own personal needs and make sure that they're able to eat, feed their families, buy medicine, things like that, while we figure out how long it's going to take for them to go back to work. I'm still very pleased that we have 28, deferrals requested out of 484 potential tenants. That's really quite encouraging. And I feel good about that from, the standpoint that even, with that in mind, if I were to break it out as far as San Francisco deferrals versus the East Bay, among our East Bay, as far as the East Bay goes, I've had more requests for deferral in the East Bay than I have in San Francisco. And so I'm hoping that, in a place like San Francisco, we end up with a lot of these people able to go back to their jobs real quickly, that they're hired back. And, I would imagine most companies are incentivized and motivated in that way. Why would you want to retrain everybody and create a new team if you don't have to? So we've had some success with rentals. I want to have Josh explain a little bit about the feedback we're getting. We've had good feedback to our use of the virtual tours. We've been showing a couple of units in the East Bay in Albany to some success. And you want to tell us a little bit more about your experience in leasing market these days?
Sure. John and I have been working on a couple of residential leases, Albany and Berkeley. Been pretty surprised to find quite a few interested parties, people looking for mainly to, not really COVID related moves or anything, just normal kind of moves, upgrades, more space, places that accommodate pets. And it's just been pretty heartening to see so many people out there kind of poking around and looking and ready to sign a lease. The virtual tours have also been very effective. We are definitely referring people to them prior to even making an appointment with me to show units. I already have on 2 units about 10 private tours set up. I stagger them by about 20 minutes each. I have a mask and gloves on, and they have a mask on. But prior to doing that, I'm sending people to these virtual tours, and they really like them. You can really get a great sense of the apartment, and so it's also it saves. It's great too, because a lot of people will look at them and say, I don't want to see it, which is great because it saves a tour and saves contact and all that. It's just kind of good for business, good for them, good for me. So anyway, that's just been a positive sign that there are this many people looking for an apartment right now, because I know San Francisco's been slower, which I imagine San Francisco will pick up at some point too, obviously, but that's just been good news.
May I
Excellent.
ask, if I may ask, is there a sense of fear in San Francisco versus Oakland, or the East Bay, I should say, in general? Are people not aware that they can maybe see properties in San Francisco? I get the feeling in San Francisco that they're much more shut down and sheltered as opposed to the East Bay. Is that your sense, Josh?
I don't know, because I'm not sure about that. I mean, JJ and John could probably comment more in terms of what tenants might or might not be looking for, or if they're coming out or not coming out. I haven't been working that market in that sense much. I feel like price point, being that the East Bay price point is lower than San Francisco, I feel like that's interesting that's appealing to a lot of people. Some of these people that are looking are people coming from San Francisco. Even, I was speaking to some people, faculty from SFSU, who live in San Francisco and want a place in Berkeley. That triples their commute. Sounds crazy to me, but I think price point is an issue. So that those high numbers in San Francisco, I would say, would be more attributed to that, as opposed to fear of seeing units or getting out there.
Mhm.
Also, on Wednesday's call, I talked a little bit about getting some market numbers, and I talked to my friend James Wavero, who's a very successful leasing agent, also property manager. And he actually tracks the volume of Craigslist ads, and he told me that there were 6,100 postings in February, and we're down to 5,600 today, which, it's only a 10% decrease. But if you think about it, we should have had a big increase. And I've seen these numbers as high as 7,000 and 8,000 units posted, or at least 7,000 or 8,000 postings, because a lot of times these postings are duplicates. But if you think about a decrease from February to April, that would have been unheard of in any year I've ever heard of. And for there to be some sort of a decrease in the number of postings tells me that a lot of people are waiting. A lot of people have withdrawn units from the market because they don't know how to show, and they don't know, they're concerned about being out themselves, or they're concerned about putting people in harm's way, or, they're holding, they figure it's better to keep their place off the market while they don't really know what market rate is, because they're not
Right.
entirely sure what demand is going to be. And so they're waiting. And I'm hoping that as we get into May, that we see more demand. A lot of times in the past few years, though, less in the last couple that I can think of, we'd have a little lull in the middle of the summer, between like the middle of June and that early part of summer break. And it would pick up again in, late July, early August. Maybe we'll see that the market sort of starts up in May or June slowly, and then slowly builds for the rest of the year from there. But right now, to see a decrease from February to April is kind of shocking, and totally expected, but very unusual.
Mhm.
I can add a comment about that decrease. I was looking at our vacant units this morning, and right now we have 10 apartments that are available, ready and available to rent. For those 10, 5 are off the market intentionally at the owner's request for the various concerns that JJ was mentioning. The other 5 are posted. 2 are in the East Bay, 3 are in San Francisco. We have another 10 units that are stuck in turnover because the vendors aren't working. So to have that many, we've never had that many units ready or almost ready at one time. So the fact that explains, I think, a little bit why the number of listings has decreased.
Seems like there might be an opportunity for people with vacant units. I don't quite see the logic in holding a unit off the market. I don't know why it hurt. Holding a sale off the market makes sense. Sales can get stale, and that's just not good for that property. A rental, I don't know why. If whatever number you were gonna target a month ago, target it now and see what happens. But
yeah, I think the main reason for these 5 owners is that they are concerned about renting to someone who may lose their job.
right, I remember we were talking about
that can happen at any time, but it's
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more likely now. But that's the fear.
Sure.
Well, the experience of losing your job under normal circumstances is, gee, I lost my job, I have to go file for unemployment. The experience of doing that now with 30 million people out of work in the last 4 weeks is kind of insanity. And as I explained a little bit on Wednesday's call, we've got a tenant who asked for forgiveness and wanted to have a chat. So we talked about it, and he said he had unemployment until March 15th, and that was when his 6 months ran out. And he was getting ready to get in a job. He had final interviews in a couple of different situations, and he thought he was a finalist for those jobs, and those processes stopped. And so he doesn't have anything right now. And if you could imagine, losing your job and then having to go get unemployment benefits and not being able to get through to EDD and having your website crash and all of that. I mean, I'm sure dealing with EDD on a regular, under normal circumstances is difficult and time consuming and not pleasant. And to have to do it right now, they're really busy. Oh, one other thing that was very interesting to me, I was talking to John and Melinda a little bit about the payroll protection, the paycheck protection loans, and I've heard nothing but bad things from our commercial tenants who have been applying for these loans. And part of the reason why they're having a bad experience is the banks that they're working with are the big banks, the Wells Fargos, the Chases, the Bank of Americas, where they're just, each of them is not particularly important or considered in any specific way by their bank, and it's just a pile of paper and everybody gets a no. And so it's kind of unfortunate for them. And I was contrasting it with my experience with First Republic, who's been really fantastic, and they got me my loan paperwork today. So it took 2 weeks for everything to be approved and everything to go through, and it was great. But Melinda shared with me that her mother actually does loan applications for a bank, and the perspective from somebody who processes loan applications is she normally handles 100 loans in a year. And when this whole thing started, they dropped 350 loans on her desk and said, get started. Mm-hmm. So she's looking at 3 times the number of loans to be processed instantly. And it has to be done in, the next 3 weeks. Now, granted, these loans have a lot less paperwork. There's a whole lot less stuff to qualify for it. So hopefully you can go through it a lot faster, because I've been through the loan qualification process for homes and commercial loans, and they dig really deep. They want to know everything about your finances. They don't want to know almost anything for these loans. It's, give us your payroll and tell us your name and fog the mirror and we'll give you some money, which is good. I mean, that's how we want this to be. But at the same time, processing 3.5, 4 times what you would normally process in a year and have to do it in the span of 3 or 4 weeks is pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lynn, did you have a comment about that?
Yeah, did you? I'm actually on the board of a community bank that is an approved lender. And we've got the same experience. But I recommend go to a small bank, because I have gotten from our CEO in the last 3 days probably a dozen accolades from non-customers who were originally at big banks, who have now come to the small banks, because we're a lot hungrier and we're a lot more relationship focused. Just put in an automated application processing to make this even easier for our customers. But your point, even for the SBA, they will tell you in 1 week they processed 14 years worth of applications.
Wow.
Jeez.
It's huge.
Yeah. Everybody needs it, and everybody's been affected, and nobody knows actually what's going on or how it works. It's difficult these days.
Well, I would say the small. I would say we've already funded a ton. We've probably 250 loans, which for our small bank, I mean, again, that's probably what we do in 5 years.
Right.
Is so. Anyway. Student what they're doing.
Yeah, it's crazy times, and what I'm looking for from commercial tenants, to go back to that, is I just want to know you're trying. I'm sorry that you can't get through. A lot of them got told the money was depleted by the time their application was even processed, and they were telling me this earlier this week, the day that it was announced that there was more money going into it. So hopefully they'll get something out of it, and we're just trusting them to treat us well when the time comes and they actually get the money. Obviously 75% of it goes to their employees. I want them to spend the money on their employees before they start paying the rent, but I do want, a piece of that 25% for consideration for having been good about this whole process and taking care of our tenants. So I'm optimistic that they will do that for us in the near future. Anybody else have thoughts, comments, questions, ideas? Cocktail recipe? It's Friday. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Really happy to have you. Next week, I'll give you an update on where we're at with deferments, whether we've heard more from tenants. But at this point, no news is good news, and I know I'm sort of adjusting to life at home, and it's crazy. I still think about, years from now, I'll have to tell my kids that, we didn't leave the house for days and days and days and days on end, and all you did was watch the iPad and you loved it. So we'll see. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining me today. It was great seeing you. Have a great weekend. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I will talk to you again next week if you join us. Happy to have you. Take care.
Thanks, JJ.
Thanks, JJ.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.